Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our February Free Press Book Club meeting for Wonder World. We're so excited to have everybody here. I'll do a quick round of introductions before we continue. So this month from the Free Press, we have Denise Duguay here to host. Denise is an arts writer and copy editor, an excellent copy editor, and we're really excited to have her here this month. We have John Toews from McNally Robinson. He does all the event coordination there. And then, of course, we have our author, Byggdin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thanks so much. It's so lovely to be joining you here from McNally, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people.
Thank you so much. KR is joining us from the East Coast tonight. John, Denise, and myself are joining you from Winnipeg. And we do a land acknowledgement every month, so you should all know that this is Treaty 1 territory, traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Dakota people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. This evening will run as it always does. I'm going to throw to John to do a brief introduction of KR and the book, and then KR is going to do a reading, and then Denise will kick off the Q&A. If you do have any questions you want to ask, you can pop them in the live chat in the box to the right of the video screen, and I will keep track of those throughout the evening. And with that, I will throw over to John to get the night started.
Thank you so much, Erin, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you, Denise, and you, KR, and it was such a pleasure to be able to revisit Wonder World in preparation for this evening. So I'm grateful to the Winnipeg Free Press for inviting me on board, and Great Plains Publications and their always surprising Enfield and Wazenti imprint for seeing Wonder World into print. We virtually launched this book at McNally Robinson back in April of 2022, and as with that reading, this visit felt like returning home in a way, which seems entirely appropriate given the book's subject matter. The novel itself is centered around a fully realized world that the reader is invited to navigate alongside its narrator, 27-year-old Isaac Funk. When we meet him for the first time, Isaac's intended triumphant East Coast escape has become a directionless solitude. When his estranged pastor father calls from his conservative Manitoba Mennonite hometown to inform of Isaac's beloved grandfather's passing, not to mention his significant bequest, the book transforms into a homecoming narrative that is as much about finding comfort in oneself as it is about making and strengthening community, even amidst the most adverse of conditions, and, as hinted at, discovering the meaning of home. I was once again struck on this reading by Byggdin's ability to deftly balance humor and emotion, and to create a sense of place with small details rather than broad strokes. I was also struck by the book's huge heart, which, like that of its narrator, sometimes seems elusive behind defensive wisecracks, but always palpably present. John Elizabeth Stinsey, the author of The Wonderful Vanishing Monuments, has said that the queer possibilities that this book breathes into the prairies is welcome as a hard rain after a dry season, with Hassan Namir drawing attention to its exploration of the complex relationship between queer identity and conservative beliefs. All that might lead you to believe that this is a forbidding work, but instead it rushes along so effortlessly that I often have to compel myself to slow down while reading to savor Byggdin's prose, and I'm really looking forward to digging into this book even further tonight. K.R. Byggdin grew up on the prairies and now lives on the East Coast. Their writing has received support from the Canada Council for the Arts and has appeared in anthologies and journals across Canada, the UK, and New Zealand. They are an alum of the Writers' Federation of Nova Scotia's Alistair MacLeod Mentorship Program and the Banff Centre's Emerging Writers Intensive, and they recently completed studies in English and creative writing at Dalhousie University. This is their first novel, although you wouldn't believe it, so it is my enormous pleasure to invite K.R. Byggdin to share a little bit from the book with us.
Oh, thanks so much, John. Heart is full hearing all those lovely words. Thank you. Yes, I thought I would read a little bit. I know many of us are probably sick of airports right now with all the terrible airport things that have been going on, but I am going to read from that section. It's kind of towards the beginning of the book as Isaac is making his way back from Halifax to Winnipeg for the first time in 10 years and kind of thinking about what it's going to be like to encounter, as John dubbed Abe, his pastor father, Abe, for the first time in 10 years.
Can we start? Before you start, can I get a page number if anyone wants to follow?
Absolutely. The page number is 17. The start of chapter 2. Although I book the earliest flight I can find out of Canada's ocean playground, it takes nearly a day and a half before my sorry jet-lagged ass is finally deposited in friendly Manitoba. I could have made the trip in a fraction of the time if I had the money to book with one of the big guys. Unfortunately, I was forced to travel with our nation's latest too good to be true low-cost carrier, BreezyJet, purveyors of an ancient art known as death by 1,000 connecting flights. All these changing time zones and airport codes quickly turned my brain to mush. YHZ to YHM, YHM to YUL, YUL to YYC, YYC to YWG, WTF, SOS. I don't know how BreezyJet is supposed to turn a profit by ping-ponging their hapless customers around the country like this. The fuel bill alone would be astronomical. They must make all their money on the small stuff. We never seem to stop anywhere long enough for the passengers to disembark and grab some food, so we're forced to rely on the airline's expensive snacks for sustenance. I try to stay strong, but end up caving on the third leg of the journey. Buy a $3 bag of peanuts from the flight attendant, then a $5 bottle of water to wash down the salt. Bastards. When I finally stumble into the bathroom of the James Armstrong Richardson International Airport 31 hours later, the reflection in the mirror makes me wince. My wiry brown hair is plastered to my sweaty forehead, hiding how much it's receded over the previous decade. Yesterday's 5 o'clock shadow and the dark, sunken circles under my eyes give a harrowed edge to my round face. In short, I look like death warmed over. Maybe people will mistake me for the corpse at Opa Willie's funeral tomorrow. A Bible verse comes to mind, something from Matthew. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. The thought of this makes me laugh and then swallow hard because, dead grandfather. Now is not the time to be making jokes. I splash some water on my bloodshot eyes and descend the escalator to the futuristic arrivals area. The last time I flew out of Winnipeg, it was through the old terminal building. It's amazing how discombobulating this cavernous new space is, especially the giant blue skylights hovering like UFOs high above me. I can't help but flinch when passing under the first one, expecting a beam to descend and suck me up into the sky. I miss the urine-like glow of the old airport's fluorescent lighting grid. That terminal somehow managed to feel both massive and claustrophobic at the same time. It was grungy and utilitarian, the perfect architectural metaphor for this hardscrabble prairie city that sprawls out around the airport to the north, east, and south. When you stepped off the plane then, you knew what you were in for. This new building presents a shiny, whitewashed Winnipeg that feels dishonest somehow, like the city is ashamed of the past and wants the world to mistake it for something it's not. I get that. Tried the same thing when I moved to Halifax, but it never works. Eventually, people always see through the polish to the pain you're hiding. When I reach the bottom of the escalator, I bypass the hug rug full of jubilantly reuniting loved ones and head straight for the exit. My ride isn't waiting for me with balloons and a handmade welcome home sign. No, Abe has informed me he'll be idling at the door so he doesn't have to pay for parking. Also, as a general rule, the Funk family aren't really huggers. Beyond the revolving doors, the sweltering afternoon heat immediately engulfs me. Gone is the briny, fishy air of the Maritimes, replaced by the scent of dirt clods and manure. Clouds squat over the city, close and breathless, pressing me into the humid earth. I am a human hot dog, boiled with the plastic wrap still on. Bienvenue à Winnipeg, bitches. Thanks.
And then Denise, do you want to start the Q&A portion?
Sure. It's a real pleasure to meet you. I really enjoyed the book.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with one of the reader questions. And excuse me, if I mute myself, it's because I'm coughing, so I'm sparing you. The question reads, K.R. Byggdin's description of Opa, William Funk, is a loving tribute of an understanding, tolerant character. Is this character based on a real person?
Well, I will say that I lost both of my two remaining grandparents while writing the book. I actually, the scene with the airport was one of the first things I wrote, and it was about a week after I started writing the book that I lost my grandmother and made the exact same journey that Isaac makes through the airport, looking up at those blue lights. So yeah, I think in everything, when I'm writing fiction, I like to pull from the real world. I do have a grandfather that was a farmer, not a game farmer, but little moments and details. I like to infuse all of my fictional characters with those elements of people I love and experiences I've had. I find that just, it gives it that extra little bit of, I don't know, believability or rooting in realness that I hope readers will connect with. So there's no kind of one-for-one connection of who Opa Willie is to who, some of the elderly folks in my life were and have been. But yeah, I definitely pull little threads from people I know to create all of my characters.
You're muted, I'm muted.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. Okay, I'm going to ease into it with one of my questions. The food theme that runs throughout. I want to say right up front that when I had the choice of books, I looked at what was there and I said, can I please have the pickle book? I was very happy to get the pickle book. And so, and there are a lot of food comes up very often in the book, and I loved it in every manifestation. The nasty nachos. I don't know if I'm going to try them, but I love that they exist. So there was the nasty nachos, there's the pickle, there's the woman that is stirring the borscht.
Yes.
That image is that scene brought me to tears. And then there's when Isaac is making, I will probably not get the pronunciation right, but when Isaac is making the soma borscht for Abe,
yeah,
that was a beautiful, it was kind of a gritty and unsentimental, very tender scene. Can you talk about what your decision to include food, how you were wanting to use it?
Absolutely. Well, I would say, first of all, growing up in Niverville, Manitoba, a very Mennonite community, Mennonite food was at the forefront of so many, whether it was gatherings at church or with family or with friends. It's just such a part that roots me when I think about Mennonite culture. I think automatically of the food. And it's something, to this day, I tend to bring an extra suitcase with me when I'm traveling to Winnipeg to freeze a whole bunch of farmer sausage and take it back out with me. I've learned to make Vrynica, the cottage cheese pierogies, so that I can still have them at home. Pascha at Easter. These are things that help me still feel connected to Manitoba, even when I'm so far away. And so to me, I guess food, because it's one of the ways I relate to the place I grew up, it made sense for Isaac to do that as well. But I think you're right with the Zoma borscht scene. Isaac and Abe have a real hard time communicating. For one thing, Abe doesn't really talk. It's hard to have anything close to a dialogue or a conversation. And so I think one of the ways that Isaac is able to draw that connection, make that connection with his father, is by making him a meal. And I think, making food for others can be a really tender, loving act. It can sometimes be one of the only safe ways that it feels to relate with other people or with the culture. You might not be willing to talk to someone, but if they hear you're sick and they drop a casserole off on your porch, you'll still feel that connection. Or, for me, I think this book explores a lot of the religious side of Mennonite culture and the difficulties that queer people can experience. But I think one of the overwhelmingly positive aspects of Mennonite culture that Isaac never loses his connection to is food. So it's one of the ways that he's, still able to engage with his culture, even when there are so many other painful parts of his upbringing. So it made sense to me to bring that into the book, to kind of write those loving moments for those recipes that I hold dear. And you're right, the pickle cover, the pickle book, I've gotten so many comments on that. I really have to thank the graphic designers that partner with my publisher. I really love how that turned out. Absolutely.
It's kind of joyful and it gives a good sense. It gave me a good sense of the comic heart of the novel,
Right.
which is not always really upfront. It's a little acid at the beginning, and then it's a little more couched in different things later on. One of the other reader questions, let's see. Why did Isaac's time in Halifax not work out for him? Were the ties to his Opa, his extended family, and even the town that rejected him too strong to completely sever?
That's a perceptive question. I think what I really wanted to focus on when I was writing this book is those narratives of queer and trans belonging in rural places. And so for Isaac, he was never going to be happy in Halifax or another larger city, because I think his journey was always one of coming home, of finding belonging and authenticity and community in the place where he's from. I was really inspired while writing to see, so many Pride events pop up across southeastern Manitoba in places like Steinbach and elsewhere, which I could have only dreamed of as a kid. I had a friend text me the other day a picture of my book up on a bulletin board at Steinbach Regional Secondary School as a recommended read for the students there, and I thought, like, again, having gone to school in southeastern Manitoba just, a decade and a half ago, I couldn't imagine books like mine being present. And so, yeah, I think I've gotten that question before of like, wow, how Isaac really has this hate on for Halifax. And I think it's not that Halifax isn't a beautiful city or can't have those moments of connection for queer folks, but for me, writing the character, that was never going to be Isaac's place of feeling home, because he's always meant to return to Newfield. So, yeah.
I'm just going to interject with a question from the chat because it's semi-related, because you mentioned having a hate-on for Halifax, but this reader would like to know why Isaac kind of has such a hate-on for Winnipeg, and have you had such a negative experience in Winnipeg is one of the questions.
That's interesting. I feel like Winnipeg is the butt of the joke oftentimes for southeastern Manitoban folks. For rural folks, there's that idea of perimeter-itis, right? That folks from Winnipeg don't really know what goes on behind the city. So I think Isaac is perhaps taking the piss out of Winnipeg, but I think that's how a lot of us growing up in rural communities experience the city as both this like wonderful place where there's shopping malls and there's movie theaters and there's all these things that we don't have at home, but also there's traffic and noise, and how do I relate to people in the city? So yeah, that's interesting. I don't know that I would have said that he's got a hate on for Winnipeg. I think it's just a very rural Manitoban outlook on what the city means and is. Yeah, that's what I'd say for that.
To be fair, the reader had said negative image. I paraphrased with hate on too.
Right. Fair.
I have to confess that I was getting a little defensive about Winnipeg, but when there was a part in it where I had to put the book down because I was laughing so hard, where you talk about I think it's the beginning of the epilogue, where you talk about Winnipeg as a crusty, like, I don't know, I can't remember.
Snotty nose, concrete, having that, we all know that feeling, right? When the ruts of ice are so hard on the road that you have to follow the ruts and not the lanes, regardless of how safe, you should theoretically be. I think there's that point, and part of it is like, here in Halifax, we often don't get snow that sticks around till January or February, so you can kind of forget that winter's a thing for a while. But we all know, growing up in Manitoba, right, by the time it's March, you've been in winter for like 5-6 months and you are just done with it.
Influences I wanted to ask you about. Do you have, what were your major influences, who and what were your major influences, and were there things that you avoided while you were writing it because you didn't want to be unintentionally similar to any particular style or approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've told this story before, I think probably at my last event with John, but when I was just out of high school, I spent a summer working inside the town office of Niverville, and I remember the mayor coming by and dropping, it was start of my lunch break or end of mine or something like that, and he dropped a copy of Miriam Toews' Complicated Kindness on my desk and said, Keenan, I just finished reading this and I think that you would really like it. And I remember having that immediate reaction of, oh, like Miriam Toews, good Christians aren't supposed to read Miriam Toews. But also the mayor is telling me to. I've got an authority figure saying you should read this book. So what do I do? So I gave it a read, and I remember my mind just being blown because it was the first time I had encountered a story set on streets that, however fictionalized, I had walked the streets that this character had been through. I had had some of the experience that this character had, and I realized that, yeah, storytelling doesn't just have to happen in places like London or New York, these big cities, or long ago or during epic battles. It can be, there can be a scene about someone making soup in a Mennonite community in Manitoba. So I definitely owe a huge debt of gratitude to Miriam and other writers like David Bergen for opening my eyes on that point of view, or that perspective, that storytelling could happen right in the places I was from. I think that really opened up possibilities and doors for me as a writer. So I will say the second part of your question about, were you worried about influences? I definitely went through many of my favorite books from folks like Casey Platt and David Bergen and Miriam to look at last names, because I wanted to be conscious that, I don't believe there's any other protagonist of a Mennonite novel from Manitoba with the last name Funk, for example. So I was kind of careful about, you have to be careful because there's only so many Mennonite surnames, and they are prolific in Manitoba. But yeah, I wanted to be kind of careful and mindful of not naming it after another writer that I knew of or of some of the major characters. So I did make little jots about, nope, that character can't have that name. So yeah, I definitely did do that while I was writing.
I feel a bit self-conscious asking this question, but is Wonderworld based on a real place?
Tangentially. So Grunthal, as some of the folks tuning in tonight may know, had a game farm back in, I think it was around the 60s to the 90s. Folks can correct me. But I remember just being struck. I think by the time I had moved to Manitoba, the place had either recently closed or was just about to close. So I never got to see it myself. But I just remember being struck by that idea of seeing these animals that you would never expect to see, outside of a zoo, just kind of in this rural prairie setting. And it kind of came to symbolize for me, I think, Isaac's journey as well back to Newfield, of the sense of someone that on the surface you might say easily write off and say, oh, Isaac is not someone who belongs in Newfield, but actually has a very specific, unique role there. So and an important role to play, an essential one. So yeah, so Grunthal, that aspect of the Grunthal game farm did kind of inspire the background for Wonderworld, and just in general, I find game farms a very fascinating, not quite zoo, not quite farm, a strange, unique space to be found across the prairies for sure.
It seemed like such a magical place and completely believable, and like an extension of Willie. Just
yes,
I wanted to have an OPA that had a farm like that.
absolutely.
Or to go to his farm.
Yeah, and I think, yes, it also underlines that, as much as everyone in Isaac's family is trying in their own way to fit in and fit inside boxes and cultural expectations, he kind of comes from a long line of people that are sort of disruptors or doing their own thing. The fact that, yeah, his grandfather is running this game farm. I'm sure at the time, growing up, people would have had, kind of looked askance at someone doing that in the middle of a rural community. But yeah, so it did serve some of those like thematic moments. And also it was just fun to just envision a space like that on the prairies for sure.
John, did you want to hop in with some of your questions?
Oh, sure. Being invariably a little process oriented, I had two quick questions for you, KR. The first was community plays such an incredibly vital part in this book, both traditional communities, self-created communities, and family. So I was curious about that, and also how important is community to you as a writer, and how does it inform your writing process?
Oh, it's so crucial. While I was working on this book, I had some tremendous opportunities for mentorship and community. I was got a chance to go through the Alistair McLeod mentorship program at the Writers Federation, where I was paired with the writer Jackie Dumas, who is from Edmonton originally and now lives on the East Coast. I also got to work with Two-Spirit Oji Nehia writer Joshua Whitehead at the Banff Center, and I also developed some real true friendships from that time at the Banff Center in 2019 that have kind of stayed with me. And I think, writing is something that I do need community to do, because it's a long, lonely process. It can take years for that book to actually get out there in the world. And so whether it's sending my writing off to friends that I trust to see what they think about it, or the other day it was a snowy day in Halifax, and the coffee I was supposed to have with a friend was canceled, and they said, why don't we just meet on Zoom, and we'll keep each other in the background and just do some writing together and just hold community for each other virtually. And that was just like so beautiful. So yeah, in terms of the writing process, this book has so many voices that have spoken into it, whether writers I admire or folks I've gotten the chance to work with that have really impacted it. And then for Isaac and that idea of community, I really, I talk about in my acknowledgements about this book kind of being a complicated queer love letter to the prairies. And I mean all of those words. I mean that it's complicated, and I mean that there's love as well. And so again, that idea that Isaac isn't just coming to Newfield to, claim this farm and make his money and get out of there, but that the reason he chooses to stay is the power of community and the power of that love he finds with family and with chosen family. Just felt like a really important message to bring forward in my writing. Yeah.
No, thank you very much. Building on that a little bit, and thank you for setting this up a little bit for me. In the acknowledgements, you make reference to the editorial process that you worked through with the wonderful Katerina Baker at Great Plains. And you mentioned that she encouraged you to go further and deeper into Isaac's world than you could have possibly done on your own. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the editorial process and how the book changed between the time it was actually submitted to the time it found publication.
It did. It absolutely changed a lot with my time with Great Plains. When I submitted the manuscript to them, it was about 95,000 words. The book in front of you now is about 55,000 words. So there was a lot of cuts. I think something I really appreciated about Katrina was always asking those questions of, how is this scene serving the story, or what are you trying to say with this, or why are the characters behaving this way? And I found there were times when I would, kind of get my back up and go, no, there's a very specific reason why this is happening. And Katrina would say, great, thank you for explaining that. And then there are other times when I go, oh no, there's literally no point to that scene or that whatever. You're absolutely right. That needs to go. So there was kind of that fine tuning. I also remember when I was working with Jackie at the Writers Fed, she kind of had me go through write backstories for all of the characters that appear, even if it wasn't sort of going to be making it onto the page. It was what makes these people tick, what makes them move through the story the way that they do. And so thinking through some of those things were really helpful for me to get to the marrow of the story. And I realized ultimately this main part of the story is Isaac and Abe being able to reconcile despite the differences in their worldviews, and choosing kind of love over dogma or ideology by the end of the book. And keeping that target in mind was really helpful to kind of hone and tighten the book throughout the editing process.
Awesome. I am going to swoop in with a couple questions from the live chat, if you don't mind. Both of these kind of touch on things that you had talked about previously, but I'm going to just circle back here. Someone was asking again about the cover art. I know you said it was a graphic designer from the publisher, but how did you actually decide on that as the image?
Yes. So yeah, in the process, and what's really nice is not every publisher, gives an author a say or a substantial say on this sort of thing. So at the time, the marketing director at Great Plains, they kind of gave me some options. We talked through what are some images or some central ideas that make sense for the book, and I kind of kept coming back to the scene that talks about pickles, where Isaac is talking how he feels that growing up in his community was akin to kind of being pickled. And that was a scene that honestly, from 2018 to the point when the book was published, it kind of stayed exactly as it was. It was one of those moments that just kind of, those rare moments that flows out of you as a writer and stuck with me. And so as a central motif, I really liked the idea of the pickle jar. And, you can even kind of see, right, there's kind of one pickle that's a different color than all the others, but it's still fitting inside that jar. So I don't know if pickle studies is going to become a thing at the University of Manitoba's English Lit department, but I'd be happy to talk on that for hours and hours.
And then the other question, you talked previously with Denise about the food culture. So you grew up in the Mennonite culture in southern Manitoba, and this reader's wondering if you're still connected to that world now that you've moved away, and what the situation is there.
Yeah, so I've got many friends and family members that I love to visit when I go back to Manitoba. Like I mentioned with Denise, those kind of seasonal foods, whether it's making green bean soup in the summer or whether it's making Pascha at Easter, that's one of the ways that I primarily kind of remain connected in those places and visiting when I can. It's a place that even though I live far away now, it's not a place that I can stay away too long from. So definitely still a place I'm connected to, for sure.
I'll throw it back to you, Denise.
I'm going to dive in with one of the original readers' questions, and it's a little harder edged, but I think we're far enough in that we can handle it. How do you balance the writing of prose that is deemed to be satire to some readers and blasphemy to others, especially for readers in southern Manitoba? The response will be laughter or anger, depending on the lens of the reader.
Yeah, that's a great question. There are so many writers that have come before me, again, like I've mentioned, like Miriam, like David, like Casey, who have put similar spotlights on this region of Manitoba. For me, the humor part just comes naturally. It's part of how I have dealt with difficult things in my own life. It's also like, Mennonites are so funny when we think about, the Unger Review, formerly the Daily Bonnet by Andrew Unger, that sort of dry sense of humor. Plautdeutsch, Low German has its, not something I can speak, but has a lot of humor packed into it as a language. So yeah, I definitely understand there are going to be folks that aren't going to look kindly on this book, just as they haven't looked kindly on something like, A Complicated Kindness or All My Puny Sorrows. But I do hope there's that sense by the end of the book that whoever you are, that there's a hopefulness and a coming together and a focus on reconciliation and community, despite the things that make us different. I think that's one of the central themes of the book that I hope comes through regardless of who the readers are. So definitely, I have those voices in the back of my head wondering, am I going too far? Am I going far enough? But ultimately, I have to write the characters, the way they see the world, who they are as people, and shine a light on, certain communities or sub-communities within southeastern Manitoba that you might not immediately think of when you think southeastern Manitoba, but that are crucial elements of community nonetheless. So at the end of the day, that's where I kind of draw my line in the sand, I guess, as a writer, is I want these stories to be included, even if they're difficult for some people to think about.
I have a semi-related question coming from the chat. This reader says, Casey Plett and Daniel Shank Cruz have written about parallels between queer identity and Mennonite identity. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on this.
That's a great question. I think, certainly the if we look back at the larger history of Mennonites as a very persecuted religious group throughout centuries, and having to deal with that through an ideology or a theology rather of pacifism, of having to move through not always being welcomed in communities or places they've been found, and having to move away. So I think in that sense, I definitely see parallels to queer folks, particularly that have grown up in rural areas, not always feeling welcome. And so I would say that's the primary connection I kind of see, is that narrative of hopefully that even if people who are reading aren't queer or trans themselves, that idea of like groups that are being othered, being pushed away, and the importance of making space for them is hopefully one that will resonate with all Mennonites as well, and folks across southeastern Manitoba. Yeah.
Making space is a really good phrase for a lot of what I got from the book, and I'll read this so I don't muck it up. This is for me, but I don't want to muck up my own words. I love how you allowed mystery and an absence of a tidy resolution, from not translating the Plautdietsch words, some of them, and phrases, and to what happened to Isaac's mother. My favorite line in the book was near the end, just before the epilogue, when Abe tells Isaac, "Suyit et." I don't know if I'm pronouncing that even close. What do you hope that line in particular conveys? It made my heart just fill up. I thought it was so beautiful and so nice that it doesn't say how you're supposed to feel. I'll stop now.
Yes.
I'll let you talk.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, Denise. I was doing a lecture at a classroom in Dalhousie earlier in the fall, and this moment also came up, and I was so happy to talk about it. That was a very deliberate choice to end with something that is, if you don't know Plautdietsch, I'm only, I've done research for the book. Again, it's not something that I speak, but that idea of the final moment we get before the epilogue being untranslatable to most of my readers was so important, because I think there is that untranslatable quality of Isaac and Abe's relationship with each other, they're always kind of almost passing each other, or those moments of connection are so hard fought for, and yet there's so much more going on under the surface than what we get in those moments. And so, that was a very conscious choice. I believe that phrase translates to something like "so it goes" or "so goes it." But the words were kind of less important than that notion of ending on this moment of, Isaac himself mentions that he's not fluent in Plautdietsch. So, maybe even an expression from Abe that Isaac doesn't even understand, but gets the sentiment and the layers of complexity underneath it. So and again, I have to thank Josh Whitehead from my time at the Banff Center for talking a lot about, how do we handle other languages in books that are primarily English? Do we translate them? Do we include footnotes? Do we italicize them? And that kind of encouragement from Josh to let those words land on the page. We have plenty of books, as he's mentioned before, that include Latin or French or these sorts of things from centuries past, where as a reader, we're just learned to okay, I'll skip past that, or I'll look it up. Why can't we do that with other languages as well? So that was one of the ways I know I've been asked before, why isn't there a glossary at the end? And it's just sort of you can Google it if you want, you can ask a friend if you want, or you can just experience that and move through and know that not every moment is translated exactly for you, but neither is life, right?
Right. Yeah. I loved it. It was, some of the phrases I looked up, and others, like the crokinole, I can't remember
Yes,
I had to know what that game was. The pieces were in a margarine container. This just speaks to me. And I grew up with crokinole, so I thought that was kind of very cool. I want to ask a fangirl question, old woman question, I guess. Is there going to be a sequel? Or maybe a TV series?
I mean, anyone is welcome to pick up the film or TV rights to this for sure. I've also been asked about that before. Is there a sequel? I'm glad. I think that hopefully means that people feel very connected and invested in these characters. I think for me, you know, a good story has to involve conflict. So if I'm pulling all of these folks into a sequel, into a second book, I've got to put them all through the ringer again. And I don't know if I can do that to them. So that's, I'll never say never. Perhaps I could see myself, a lot of people have asked about the character of Noah and, if I might write more from his perspective. I could see something like that in a novella or short story form. So I'll never say never. But yeah, what I think gives me pause is I'm not ready to hurt those characters again through the tragedy and trauma that you need for a book. So not at this time.
One of our live watchers had just like a general what's next question for you. I don't know if you have anything that you want to share or talk about right now, but people are very curious what you're working on.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Yeah, I do have a few more stories coming out in various journals this year. I am working on a new book. I won't say too much about that because I find if I give the story all away to others while talking about it, I lose the motivation to actually write the damn thing. So yeah, but I do have hopefully more work coming out in the future for folks to read. Yeah.
John or Denise, do you have any further questions?
I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about walking that line, like the balance of humor and drama within the book, and how difficult it was to necessarily maintain that balance. Were there any moments that you found it particularly difficult where you found you almost had to inject some humor to leaven the seriousness of the situation? And just if you could speak on that a little bit, I'd be fascinated to hear more.
Yeah, that's a great question. As a writer, I'm really conscious about what I'm putting my readers through. I want to be very careful that even though I may cover traumatic, dark, difficult subject matter, that I'm not doing it in kind of that, trauma porn way, and that idea of just like pulling my reader again through the ringer just for the sake of shock value or that sort of thing. And so I find humor is one of the ways I temper it. I don't, as a reader, I don't personally often reread a book multiple times, even when I love it, but I do keep returning over and over again to Miriam Toews' All My Puny Sorrows. And I've never cried so hard or laugh so hard, or sometimes, been laughing with snot bubbles of tears in my mouth so hard at the same time with Miriam's book. And so I again, just huge debt of gratitude for the work that she brings out into the world and showing, those possibilities of how we can walk through really dark, difficult subject matter, but still give the reader hope or light or a way to pull them through the scene without completely traumatizing them. So I hope that's what I've done, and that people feel that way after reading the book, is that I've walked them through difficult territory, but gently and holding their hand and bringing them through. That's definitely my goal as a writer.
You've also had the opportunity to bring the book beyond the perimeter into smaller communities. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how that was and what the reception has been. You've already mentioned the wonders of actually seeing the book as a recommended reading within a library. And further to that, have you received any horrified feedback about the inclusion of spinach in soma borscht?
Not yet, although I had a reader while I was reading the book that was like, my Oma would not be happy about this. And so I think I even put a line in about, your Oma would not be happy about this when it's like, I found it on Google. I've got to blame the Google, but also, yes, Omas might be horrified for sure. Yeah, I've done some readings in rural communities, and that's been really nice. It's been surprising, again, like I'm living here now on the East Coast in Nova Scotia. And still, so many readers, even if they're not familiar with Mennonites at all, that sense of small town life really comes through to them. I've had folks from Nova Scotia, from BC logging towns, all over the place talk to me about how they're still able to relate to that sense of a small town and what it means to live there. So yeah, that's been really gratifying, because it was, that's another kind of tightrope that I've been walking is how to make the book. If you are Mennonite, you're going to feel like, okay, this person, even though they're not culturally Mennonite, they've done their homework, or they've clearly lived in a community, they know what they're talking about. But then also for readers that have no context for Southeastern Manitoba or Mennonites, will still feel like they can access the story and get something out of it. So that was definitely something I tried to walk the line on for sure while writing.
Well, it spoke volumes to this big town Catholic. The food was a big part of that, and the humor and the beautiful details, like the where you go and park in the Mennonite historical trail, and
Yes.
no, sorry, not you, the character of Isaac that's
Yes.
there and considers this very melodramatic, like I could go out and I could walk my own path and reclaim it, and the mosquitoes are just too much, and like it was so very relatable. I know that word gets used a lot, but I felt it felt very intimately relatable.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to read this book.
Oh, yes, my pleasure.
That was amazing. Thank you all so much. Also big snaps for all the reader questions. They were so thoughtful, and the chat is like so bustling tonight. This doesn't always happen. So I'm very thankful for everyone who's watching and participating. It's really great to see. Just before we leave for the evening, I want to mention next month's book, Even That Wildest Hope by Sayward Goodhand. Longtime members of the book club will know that I love short fiction. I love short stories. I love flash fiction. So this is like an extra special treat for me. So I'm very excited to dig into that. We have another new host from the Free Press. Next time, reporter Katie May will be joining us. So that's really exciting as well. But I think that's it for tonight. So I just offer a huge thank you to John, Denise, and KR for joining us. And we will see you all again next month. Bye, everybody.